Hi, I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata. Chris Irons from Strata Solve is a regular contributor to LookUpStrata. Chris keeps an eye on Queensland strata news and happenings and read a recent order from the Commissioner's Office that had lots of moving parts and contained circumstances and concepts that come up quite a lot, particularly about general meetings. Chris suggested it would be interesting to unpack the order and discuss each aspect in more detail. So thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks very much, Nikki. I guess the background to all of this is that I came across this adjudication order very recently in early April of 2025. And, a lot of adjudication orders are published and they're always interesting to read. But this one in particular was interesting because it covered a lot of ground that I get asked, and I'm certain that LookUpStrata get asked as well, about the conduct of general meetings, strata general meetings. One of the reasons why there's always a question about how general meetings go is because so much can go wrong with a general meeting. There's a lot of requirements before it, there's a lot of requirements during it, and there's a lot of requirements that follow it. When you have a lot of moving pieces to something, then all it takes is for one part of that to not go according to plan, and then the whole thing is called into question thereafter, or it tends to be anyway. This particular order highlights a few aspects of general meeting process that I think are relevant, certainly in Queensland. And while legislation differs from state to state, I think that other states and territories could also take something out of it as well, Nikki. The order in question there on the screen, I would encourage everybody to have a good read of it. It's written in really kind of useful, user-friendly style as well. The link is there on the screen. So in essence, what this was all about is that the annual general meeting was scheduled as per usual at this particular scheme. And it was scheduled to be held, I believe, in the barbecue area, so on common area at the body corporate. And then wouldn't you know it, there was a cyclone that came through. And on the day in which everything was scheduled. So the body corporate then decided it would move towards a virtual meeting, an electronic meeting, if you want to call it that. And then in this particular dispute, the owner, or I think it was, or maybe it was a couple of owners, disputed the validity of doing so for a few reasons. Let's go through that. So the first thing I think everybody should keep in mind is this idea of flexibility and agility. In this particular case, as I say, there was a cyclone that came through. And even though all of the meeting material had already gone out for the in-person material, the adjudicator was, I think, at pains to point out to people that there is a need to be adaptive. The adjudicator actually makes reference in this particular case to pictures of debris and flooding at the area in which the meeting was going to be held. So in other words, completely unreasonable to expect that people are going to stand around in those conditions and have a meeting. So first learning for everybody, even though there are really prescriptive processes under legislation for how a meeting should be held, it does have to be adaptive to the circumstances, and each case should be considered on its merits. So in answer to the question on scheme, absolutely a bad weather can change the circumstances of a general meeting, which then leads us to the second issue. So the body corporate then moved to an electronic meeting, and the applicant in this particular case took issue with that and said that the body corporate had not previously resolved to do so. Under Queensland legislation, an ordinary resolution needs to be passed to authorise holding an electronic meeting. Now you look at that and you think, well, that's that then. That electronic meeting should not proceed under those circumstances because the ordinary resolution was not passed. But the adjudicator pointed out that there had been several electronic meetings organised and held in the past without any issue being raised by any other owner or owners, or if there were, the concerns raised weren't too dramatic. But again, taking into account the very specific circumstances of this. The adjudicator also pointed out, and this is a really good point for everybody as well, there is a difference between electronic voting and electronic attendance. They're two separate things. Electronic voting is precisely as the wording suggests. It's voting conducted. Sometimes it's an app, sometimes it's a platform in which you actually lodge your vote right up until the point of a general meeting. Electronic attendance is actually attending the meeting. So logging into Zoom, logging into Microsoft Teams, and being present at the meeting. So the second learning for everybody, they're two separate things, and really important to keep that in mind. And while you should always be aiming to have passed that ordinary resolution about electronic attendance and electronic meetings, in this particular case, the adjudicator deemed it was acceptable to do it that way. Which then leads us to the next point. The applicant took issue with holding the electronic meeting in the way it was because in their view, it restricted the ability to participate. They apparently had some issues with the mute function. I'm not exactly sure what happened there. And also claimed that because the meeting was held electronically, there was a restriction on discussion, a restriction on general business. The adjudicator made a couple of points, which again, I think are really relevant for everybody in this situation. The first thing is that regardless of method and regardless of circumstances, the key thing in any general meeting, particularly where there's some contention about it, is the ability for voters to participate. Can voter participation be maximised? And in this case, the adjudicator found that in actual fact, holding the meeting electronically had more people attend than the in-person meetings had been having attending. So the idea that somehow the electronic meeting restricted participation was found to be not particularly accurate in this situation. The adjudicator pointed out that the platform used, and I'm not sure if it was Zoom or Teams in this particular case or another platform, there was actually a chat function which enabled everybody who was attending the meeting to exchange messages during the meeting. And the adjudicator pointed out that while there is capacity for discussion at a general meeting, it's not a given right, and it's not as though it's a free-for-all in a meeting either. And so the adjudicator noted that the ability to use the chat function actually facilitated a better quality and a better standard, those are my words, by the way, a better quality and a better standard of discussion in the meeting, which then leads to this issue about general discussion or general business. I can't begin to tell you the number of times I get asked about general business at a meeting, and Nikki, I'm certain LookUpStrata does all the time. So here's a fun fact to everybody watching and listening to this. There is no such thing as general business under Queensland Strata legislation. It's not referred to. So what does that mean? It means that while you can absolutely have a segment of general business at the end of the meeting, you can do that to your heart's content. You can discuss it for hours and hours. And I'm aware of some general business that has gone for hours and hours. That's all it is, discussion. No decisions should be made there. And if you front up to general business with an expectation of having a matter resolved, that's the wrong expectation to have. The adjudicator pointed out, and other adjudicators have pointed out, that even though there is no capacity for general business legislatively, body corporate meetings should still follow a relatively standard governance procedure. So in other walks of life, in the corporate sector, in the not-for-profit sector, discussion is generally a feature of meetings, but again, it's treated in a very specific way. So the third learning for everybody, voter participation should be maximised, but be cautious about your expectations of general business and general discussion. Which then leads us to the overall issue at play here. So there was something wrong with the meeting. Technically, there were aspects of it that were defective. And when I say defects here on the screen, I'm talking about defects in the meeting, not building defects. So there were some defective features of the meeting. So that means the whole meeting is invalid, doesn't it? And the answer is no, of course it doesn't mean that at all. And the adjudicator is at pains to say that. So much can go wrong with the meeting process simply because one or even two or even three parts of the meeting might be technically incorrect. That doesn't mean the whole thing just gets thrown out the window and overturned. In most cases, even if the adjudicator found there was sufficient grounds to invalidate or to be concerned about an aspect, the more likely outcome is always going to be that the adjudicator will order that the meeting get run again. And again, that happens in the corporate world a lot as well, is my understanding. Essentially, what the adjudicator looks for is the detriment caused. Was there a significant amount of detriment, and did it occur to a lot of people? If the answer is yes, then fine, the meeting might be invalidated. But typically speaking, and our learning from this particular slide, even if there are technical defects in a general meeting procedure, that is not of itself necessarily grounds for the entire meeting to be tossed out. Really important point for everybody, that if you are pursuing concerns on a technical basis, you might want to think again about that, which then leads to the final point. Actually, a lot of this particular order is about doors, of all things. And it's a really good question because this issue about responsibility for doors comes up an awful lot in my experience. And again, Nikki, I'm certain it comes up with LookUpStrata as well. The adjudicator made the point that generally speaking, in a high rise, and I'm speaking very generally here, and I'm speaking only on a Queensland basis, but if the door is located in the boundary between common property and a lot, then the body corporate is typically responsible for the maintenance of that door. In this particular case, the adjudicator took a look at the survey plans and came up with a very preliminary view. This was an injunctive order, by the way. This was an interim order. Came up with a preliminary view that the doors were not in the boundary. They were set back a bit. Therefore, it is quite likely the body corporate is not responsible. On the agenda, there were motions that the body corporate had put forward to have the body corporate responsible for maintenance, and that's a no-no. Body corporate cannot be responsible and cannot pay money for something it does not have a legislative responsibility to do. So in this case, the adjudicator did make an order about those motions specific to the maintenance of the doors. A good learning for everybody in that particular case. So what are the overall things to take away here? I've made this point a couple of times. I'm going to make it again. Meetings go wrong a lot. I think if we were going to cancel every meeting that had a problem with it, there'd be no meetings. Literally no meetings would ever get conducted. So they go wrong a lot. We should always strive to make sure every part of a Strata meeting is 100% correct. It's highly unlikely any meeting would ever be 100% correct. So it's always about the detriment caused. Number two, it's always about the ability of voters to participate, and the maximum voter participation is always preferred. That's what the adjudicator will always consider. Number three, as I said before, just be really clear about this idea of general business. Great to have a discussion, great to catch up with people, great to talk about things in the future, but that's all it ever is. It's a chat. Nothing should ever be decided in general business, and certainly nothing talked about in general business should ever be implemented. Only motions should be implemented. And number four, and harking back to the previous slide about the doors, Nikki, it's always better to focus on specifics rather than high-level concepts when we talk about Strata issues. So, are we concerned about the technical defects in the meeting? Sure, that's not ideal. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But far better to focus on a specific concern, in this case, the maintenance issue, rather than the conceptual issues or the vibe of the thing, if I can use that expression. Specifics rather than broader concepts when we're talking about Strata issues and Strata disputes is always the best bet to get resolutions. That is me, as per always. It's not typical that I guess Strata Solve, spend a lot of time analysing a specific case. But this is a really good encapsulation of a lot of concerns that people have about a lot of different issues. So have a good read of the order, have a think about how it applies to your circumstances. Remember, adjudicators' orders are always specific to the particular case. You should not rely upon those as being 100% precedent. Always look for the application of specific circumstances to your instance. And maybe the thing to take away from all of this is if you're holding meetings in Queensland between December and March, and you're thinking about holding them outdoors, maybe just have a contingency plan up your sleeve. Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks so much, Chris. Great advice. All right, thank you very much. If you gained value from this video, please hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're looking for information about parking, strata insurance, defects and more, head over to lookupstrata.com.au or sign up to our free weekly newsletter via the link in the description box below.